Hi and welcome to Management Concepts. In this mini lecture series, we start to unpack the contemporary workplace. Now, because this is the first mini lectures of this course, I'm going to start by introducing how we've set up the course. So, in each of the first modules, you'll find this slide, and it will tell you where we are in the course. We start the course by saying, here's an introduction to management. This is where we are today with contemporary workplace. And in our next series, we talk about the history of management. And while some of you will say, why do I need to know about the history? Without understanding where we are, without understanding where we came from, we don't understand how we are and where we are today. And that's why it's really important to refresh ourselves in terms of where management as a discipline has come over the years. After we've introduced management, we then move to the functions of management. And there are 4 functions of management: planning, organising, controlling, and leading. And these underpin everything we do every day as a manager. Following the functions of management, we then move to management and its context. And context is important because it's how we enact the functions of management and in what area or what situation do these actually change. So we start thinking about environment and diversity. How do we manage diversity? What does it mean to have an organisational culture? How does our political system in the US or Australia actually impact how we do work on a day-to-day business? We then move on to international dimensions of management, because whether we like it or not, we are in a global economy and we need to understand, if we are global managers, how do we do things differently? Following which, we talk about motivation, then ethical behaviour and social responsibility, and finally we talk about leading and managing change. Now, while there are a lot of other contexts we could have covered, these are the essentials in order to start you off on your journey into understanding management a little bit more. So during the course of this semester, you'll also see these learning icons which appear on all of our slides. And they're little tiny pictures which mean different things. So let me run you through them now. So this book with a little D on front of it is the definition. That's an important thing to remember. This little map is a framework. The little glasses is your career. This little icon means that it's a current issue that we want to talk about today. The little storm box is a problem area that we may need to investigate. This box means that it's a key research in this area. And this box means that it's a key theory. Now, when it comes to your assessment and also when it comes to your courses in general, you will need to know the difference between a theory and a framework, or a definition and a concept, or a career issue versus a problem area. And that's why we started to map these, just to make it a little bit easier for you. Now, some of you, this will make no sense to you because you don't work in a picture framework. However, for those that do like pictures to help map the course, we have embedded them. So please use as you would like. So in today's mini lecture, we talk about the contemporary workplace, and we've got certain learning objectives, and these go across all 3 of your mini lectures for this particular week. So the first one is to define the challenges that we face in managing today's economy. We then describe organisations in today's workplace and explain who are managers and what do they do. We talk about the management process, and then we explain how you can learn the essential managerial skills and competencies, because this is really important as you go into your career. So let's start with the challenges of managing in today's economy. So I mentioned before that we're in a global economy, but we're also a networked economy, which means that what happens over here impacts here. What happens overseas impacts here. Whether you're a large or a small company, it doesn't matter, because ultimately what we're really doing is connecting each other. And what we tend to also find is that our national economies are increasingly interdependent on what happens with each other. I mean, think about what's happening in the US with Donald Trump at the moment. What he does impacts us in Australia, even though if you go to America, we don't actually rate on their system of important countries. While we're important, we're not that important to their economy, apparently. And yet we do impact them. So it's really important to start by saying, look, we are a networked economy, but we're also a global economy, which means that when we're positioning ourselves as a manager of the future, we need to understand how all of this that happens over here impacts us here. Because organisations are always expected to excel. Now, we can't just sit here and go, all right, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to make my blankets, and that's all that's going to matter, because I'm going to go down to the local fete or the local market and sell them, and that's how I get my profit. In reality, even if you're small scale, such as making blankets in the local market, what you tend to find is that you will need to continually excel because there are increasing competition, because people in China are doing the same thing for less. So how do you make sure that you keep up with that demand? But it also means, so that's at an organizational level, but from an individual's perspective, it means that there is no more guarantees of long-term employment. We can no longer say, I'm in a permanent job and I'm going to stay there for 50 years, because I don't know about you, but if you look around the workplace that you're currently in, very few people stay for a long period of time. And organizations go out of business all the time. I mean, you see large companies restructuring every 3 years, and they have to keep with the demand and keep on top of what's happening outside of their company. So this long-term employment that happened a few generations ago, where perhaps your grandparents or your great-grandparents actually stayed in the same job for 30, 40, 50 years, that's no longer current, which means that you need to be on top of your career. And that's why it's important for you to know about the contemporary workplace. In an organization, what tends to happen at the moment is that we're undergoing this brain power challenge, because according to the resource-based view of the firm, the only thing that we can compete on is our human resources. Now, while we can patent certain technology and while we can trademark others, what we tend to find is that people tend to find similar formulas. I mean, think about KFC chicken. They kept that formula under wraps for many, 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 many years, but there is still competition that comes after them. Think about Red Rooster and other forms of fast food joints. But that's what creates this brain power challenge, because people can replicate eventually, if they keep trying, your formula. Alternatively, it may get out for whatever reason, but your intellectual capital, the people you employ, cannot be replicated. And that's where the brain power challenge comes into it, because what we tend to find is that the source of all success is the people in which they employ. So the intellectual capital that exists, and the intellectual capital is the collective brain power or shared knowledge of the workforce, that's where your competitive advantage lies. What we're also finding is that because we're actually basing our success and competitive advantage on people, we tend to employ more knowledge workers than we have before. Now, that means that when we're going out to the market to find the best person, what we're really looking for is how their knowledge can embed themselves in their organization in order to create that success. So intellectual capital is that collective brain power or shared knowledge of a workforce, and a knowledge worker is someone whose knowledge is the important asset. So they may be your policy people, or your researchers, or your executive managers, or your CEOs even. So this is what is creating that competitive nature within organizations, and it's called the brain power challenge. The other thing that impacts our organization significantly is technology. Right? We're seeing this complete innovation in the technology spaces. We expect more from our phones. 5 years ago, we wouldn't be doing what we are doing now on our phones. It wasn't as expected 10 years ago, for example, for you to answer an email on the weekend or even after hours. In fact, work was 9 till 5. Whereas now work is when you get up, when you go to bed, and all on the weekends. And if you're not on top of your emails in certain industries, then you get penalised for that. So we're starting to be this 24/7 space. And that's important for you to know, because while we're employing people for 36.5 hours a week, the questions and the ethics around that decision making may need to be questioned at some point. So that's something that we're going towards in the future. And on this slide also we talk about technology in the sense of the way in which we work. Think about at your local supermarket, the influx of checkouts, where you actually go and scan all your items yourself. And at the moment they're working on your prototypes and your space for the computers to scan an entire trolley without the need for you to take it all out. So all of these things are going to change the way in which we work. Will those positions be current or not? what are we going to do with those people? I mean, if we're looking at Coles and Woolies, for example, they've actually downsized the number of people that they need on a daily shift. But how will that be in the future if we've got all of these trolleys doing everything virtually? There's also this concept of a virtual space. Now, think about your studies. We work virtually all the time. So we Skype into meetings, we call into meetings, we have common databases called intranets, we share information and files all the time, we make plans and solve problems together, and it all happens without meeting face to face. In fact, in some companies, people have never met, and yet they work really effectively together. So trying to work out, how do I use technology to the best of my advantage, but also understanding that the best meetings and the best way to connect people is face to face is really important. So there's been this influx of business technology that exists to allow people to connect. There's also been this expectation that you are computer literate, right? So there's this, think about the industries in which are usually paper-based. So the aged care sector, for example, for years, all the records were on paper. And in the last 10 years, there's been this slow change for it to be electronic. And then you've got things like your electronic health record. However, there's some challenges with that in terms of hacking and whether the data is actually secure. That still needs ironing out. However, this is where the technology is going, and we need to start thinking about how do we make technology our friend rather than our foe. What we tend to also find is that because we're in a global economy, we are so diverse. And this is important because workplace diversity exists, but it actually benefits an organisation if it's done in the right manner, right? So we're looking at legislation. There's diversity legislation about discrimination. We can't discriminate on the basis of gender, race, age, ethnic culture, able-bodiedness, religious affiliation, sexual orientation. No differences between two people can be discriminated on. However, not everyone is tapping into this market effectively. So what we need to do is start unpacking, and certainly in this course we start talking about how we can do diversity better within organisations. Because when someone advertises a position now, it's more likely we're going to get overseas applicants than it ever has been. Because people don't see the country borders as a significant issue in obtaining employment elsewhere. Now, if we're working in a knowledge economy, where we're hiring people for their talents, that also means that we need to provide a support system so that they feel like they belong in our organisation. And as a manager, our job is to make sure that everyone is looked after. The other key issue that we need to discuss is ethics. So ethics and social responsibility involve all aspects of the organisation, from the individual behaviour of members to the way in which we impact society. Right? So if we're looking at jobs now, you tend to find more links to sustainability, more links to social responsibility, more acceptance of volunteering roles, but also this conscious effort about being safe and fair for everyone. People tend to want to be protective of human rights. And we talk through ethics and social responsibility in an entire module because it is extremely important in an organisation today that these issues are talked through and that these issues are put in policy. And finally, in this introductory mini lecture, we want to talk about your career. Now, many of you are sitting here doing this degree in an effort to get into a particular career or change your career at some point. But how is career going to work? If I've just told you before that there's no long-term jobs, what does it mean for you? And now if you look at organisations today, we tend to have core workers. So these are full-time and they've got a very traditional career path. So they come in permanent or temporary, but they've got an actual full-time job. Then there's also contract workers, because organisations realise that we don't always have to hire people full-time to get the best out of them. We can actually hire them on contract. And they can perform specific tasks and we can pay them for those tasks, but we don't need a permanent role for them. And the final category is casual and part-time workers, right? So we hire them as they're needed as well, because in every organisation there are peaks and troughs, and those peaks and troughs determine how often I need a workforce to support me. Now, there's this new term that's been bandied around about free agency, because what it means is that you have the choice at any point in time to be a free agent. You manage your career. So traditionally, organizations managed your career. They told you when to go for promotion. They told you where they saw you in this organization. But because our career is changing constantly, we are a free agent. So we can go to our competitor and say, look, I've been working at X organization for 5 years. I'm really interested in opportunities in your organization, and start those conversations. We're not bandied to an organization in any way, shape, or form. But it also means that they're not going to commit to you. So the question that you should be asking yourself in terms of saying, how do I position myself differently in order to get the best out of my career? Knowing that we're in a contemporary workplace, and we're in a contemporary workplace that has changing technology, changing expectation in terms of our work itself, expectation for 24/7, and we're in a global economy. So that is our part 1 of our mini lecture on contemporary workplace. And the next mini lecture series, we talk about this in more detail differently.